The world is full of unsolvable mysteries, and no matter how hard we may try, many of them still remain that way, and all we're left to do is sit back and peddle theories. Sometimes it's easier to accept that there are no answers. But before we start the video, I'd like for you guys to check out our new channel, Bill Knows, and subscribe if you'd like. We've already started to upload new content over there, and you can find the link in the description. It'd mean the world to us if you checked it out, but let's get started with the video. 85. Joanne Rich had moved with her husband and daughter to Lincoln, Massachusetts in April of 1961, only for her to mysteriously disappear in October in that same year. On the 24th of that month, while her husband, Martin, was away on business, she started her day as she normally would. Witness testimonies account for her whereabouts up until 2:15 p.m., when she simply vanished after having been spotted carrying from her car something red with outstretched arms. After the Rich's daughter, who was 4 at the time, Lillian, notified a neighbor that her mother was missing, the police were notified and an officer showed up at the scene just minutes later. He found DNA evidence across the kitchen, driveway, master bedroom, and on the stairway. The police later stated that the evidence was inconclusive, including the fingerprints that were found at the scene. Despite the initial presumption that the evidence found might indicate a struggle, it was later found that it was more consistent with someone staggering, trying not to fall over after having suffered an injury. Afterwards came a number of unconfirmed sightings and theories on what might have happened. Stories of how Joanne's parents passed away in a suspicious fire surfaced, and to top it all off, a local reporter discovered that she'd borrowed 25 books that summer, most of them relating to crimes and disappearances. 84. Juliette Stewart Points was born in Omaha, Nebraska. Her early life showed a predisposition towards excellence. She was part of several clubs in college, earned merits in both debate and wrestling, all the while being a key player in the running of the student body. During her senior year, she chaired the student council, was voted most popular, and was named editor-in-chief of the yearbook and secured her position as a valedictorian. Her left-leaning political career proved quite outstanding as she helped push a number of reforms. During the late 1920s, she quit her former career in favor of intelligence work for the Soviet Union. During the 1930s, she was mobilized to both China and Russia, where in 1936 she witnessed the early phases of Stalin's Great Purge, also known as the Great Terror. It's widely believed that the experience is what made her defect, as her disappearance took place less than a year after her return home. She was last seen on June 3, 1937 in Manhattan, New York, her luggage still in her apartment days later. Though what transpired exactly is still unclear, as statements and testimonies of the topic keep piling up, the common theory is that she was disposed of by her former employers. 83. On November 22, 1963, tragedy struck the US with the assassination of JFK. Controversy surrounds the incident to this day, with new information having come out over the years. After a whole debacle regarding the circumstances of the president's untimely passing, and years passed, a new scandal emerged. JFK's brain was stored in a container along with several autopsy materials. The container itself was stored in the White House under the care of the Secret Service, at first that is. After the initial autopsy in 1963, Robert Kennedy, JFK's brother, had the container moved to a special room in the National Archives. 3 years later, government officials noticed it had disappeared. If the incident in and of itself would have raised quite a few eyebrows, the fact that it was kept from the public for 12 years caused an uproar. The public came to know what had happened after the Freedom of Information Act of 2016 was used to access proceedings conducted by the JFK Assassination Records Review Board from 1992 to 1998. During these proceedings, it was revealed that Robert Kennedy, JFK's brother, stole his brain. Although conspiracy theorists believe the brain was stolen to cover up the truth about JFK's assassination, some have speculated that Robert stole the brain to maintain the privacy of his brother's life. Regardless of why Robert stole the brain, today nobody knows what has become of it, whether Robert buried it, destroyed it, or it's simply hidden away from the public eye. 82. The Amber Room's first construction took place over 10 years, starting in 1701 and ending in 1711. The original artists behind what was once called the Eighth Wonder of the World were Andreas Schluter, a German sculptor, and Gottfried Wolfram, a Danish amber craftsman. Their creation was meant to decorate a room of the Charlottenburg Palace. Later on, during a state visit, Peter the Great, the Tsar of Russia at the time, fell in love with the piece of art. Because of that, Frederick William, the King of Prussia, had it taken apart in 1716 and sent over to the Tsar. It was presented as a token of friendship in the wake of the newly formed alliance against Sweden. For over 2 centuries, the Amber Room remained in Russia. During that time, several modifications and additions were made to it. During the first year of World War II, the Germans found the art piece covered in a thin wallpaper within the Catherine Palace. It was then taken apart once again and sent back to Germany to be put on display at a castle museum. Around the end of the war, the city hosting the Amber Room came under heavy artillery fire. That resulted in the disappearance of it and a great amount of speculation. In spite of many efforts to recover the installation, only one panel has ever been found of the 4. It was in possession of a German soldier's son in 1997. 81. Joseph Newman was by profession a bottling company owner. A known partner of his was also named Joseph, who disappeared in 1929. By 1930, the American prohibition had been in effect for almost 4 years, and it showed in the growing tensions among both the population and businesses. Criminal activity spiked during the period, and everyone had a hand in it. Hidden rooms were built all around the country to serve as either secret bars or bootlegging distilleries. It didn't come as a surprise that Newman might have made a few enemies along the way, working in the bottling industry. Rumors surfaced that there was likely bad blood between him and some local liquor operators. It was thought that they suspected him of ratting them out to police, compromising one of their illegal liquor stills. At the same time, he was thought to have a grudge against them due to a large outstanding sugar bill. On September the 10th, 1930, Newman dared his wife to race home as they were each traveling in their own vehicles. That marked the last time he was ever seen. His wife arrived home 10 minutes after him, only to find his car empty. The doors were open and the key was still in the ignition. 80. Carla Meyer was born on the 7th of February 1918 under the name Carla Wohlert in Germany. There's very little data regarding her childhood and even adolescence, indicating she most likely led quite a discreet life. What is certain is that on the 15th of September 1941, at around 23 years of age, she underwent training to become a guard. In March of the following year, she was stationed in Poland at the Auschwitz camp. It was only one of the 3 camps she worked at during the war. While working there, she attained the title of chief overseer of a sorting party. Afterwards, documents state that she was transferred to another camp, which was situated not too far away. That didn't last very long though, as the camp was evacuated in 1944. In the wake of the aforementioned evacuation, Meyer went back to Auschwitz. She arrived there only to later disappear off the face of the earth. As there are no records of any family, no investigation ever took place. Though only a clog in a gigantic machine at the time, her testimony could have shed more light on some of history's most infamous places and the way they were run. 79. It's 1953. Ronald H. Tamman Jr. is 19 and a sophomore at the Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. He lives on campus on the 2nd floor of the Fisher Hall. He's known as a muscular athlete, part of the university's wrestling team, and a bassist in a local band, and as a residence hall advisor. By no means is he unpopular, nor does he show any signs of being depressed. As such, it came as quite a surprise when around 10:30 p.m. on Sunday, April the 19th, Tamman's roommate returned to their room only to find the lights on, the radio playing, and all of Tamman's belongings still there. That raised a few questions, especially as his coat was also there in spite of the snowy weather. At that point, the roommate most likely presumed something was up. In spite of that, when Ronald didn't show up the following morning, he was convinced he had to call the authorities. The last person to have contact with him was the hall manager. Tamman had asked him earlier that evening for a new set of bed sheets. From there on, it all became speculation. A woman living in a close-by town stated that she'd encountered someone matching his description earlier the following morning. Numerous other sightings were reported as years passed by, but his fate remains a mystery to this day. 78. It was the Halloween weekend of 1926. Marvin Clark was a retired American sheriff from Marion County, Iowa. American born and bred, he suddenly disappeared while on his way to his daughter in Portland, Oregon. He was around 73 years old at the time. Clark set off on the 30th of October, 1926, and some witness accounts place him at a bus terminal in Portland the same day. He was described as wearing a dark suit and slacks. In spite of said accounts, he never actually attended the meeting that he'd set out to with his daughter. After 10 days of Clark marking no contact with his family, his wife received a postcard he supposedly sent. It was stamped from Bellingham, Washington. Later on, several accounts placed him there between the 2nd and 3rd of November. Due in large part to his age, he was declared deceased not long after his mysterious disappearance. In spite of that, the search for his remains is still an open case as of early 2021. The first ray of hope came in 1986 as detectives discovered a John Doe in a wooded area between Clark's hometown and Portland. Mementos found alongside it led them to believe it might have been him. The incident only broke national headlines almost 3 decades later, though, in 2011. The John Doe was then DNA tested in 2018, determining it was a completely different, yet still unknown individual. 77. Yet another student to disappear in the late 1920s was Alice Corbett, who was enlisted at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. At the time, she lived on campus and was dating a student at a nearby Amherst College. His name was Thomas Sterling. Reportedly, Corbett asked him, a week prior to her disappearance, to buy her poison. The last confirmed account of her was that she left her room in a daze at around 8 a.m. on the 13th of November, 1925. Between the request to her boyfriend and the note found in her quarters by her friends, a picture of mental instability was drawn. The note read, "Mother, I'm going home." It couldn't have helped that earlier in the morning, she disappeared herself. A friend of hers passed away from accidental asphyxiation by illuminating gas. Jean Robeson was a fellow student of Corbett, and it was suspected that the two might have shared the gas. If it was carbon monoxide that they had inhaled, that would explain both the accident and the confused state Corbett left in. After her disappearance, significant effort has been put into finding her whereabouts. The very next day, searches were mounted by both state police and even the local Boy Scouts. In spite of a lot of false information, she's believed to have been sighted wearing a yellow coat twice, only the coat was never found. 76. Lu Mingyang was born in 1881 in Hebei and is known to have lived until at least 1937. As he graduated from the King's Army Medical School, he developed close affiliations with the Zhili clique. This clique was one of the most mutually hostile factions that split from the Beiyang clique. It was a time of strife and conflict for the Republic of China, uncertainty looming overhead. Meanwhile, Mingyang nurtured his political connections while serving in quite a number of medical and health offices. The high point of his medical career, though, came in the form of him being named dean of his academy. After completing his term as dean, he also achieved the rank of general and was named mayor of Beijing. He held office from 1922 to 1924, starting off his political career on a high note. Later on, he became the Minister of Health within the Beiyang government. During that time, he built and proposed a plan that would have reformed the military. Just 2 years later, he was offered the position of a collaborationist governor. He accepted that offer and was in office from 1934 to 1937. As he left office, though, he was never seen again. 75. The year is 1914. First Lieutenant Alejandro Silva is to take his final exam before being a fully fledged military pilot along with 2 of his companions. Before dawn on the 9th of March, he was at the Lo Espejo Aerodrome making precautions for the day's flight. The total distance of the flight was 111 miles and was supposed to be completed in 2 hours. The conditions that day were quite unfriendly, and the aviators gave up on their first attempt due to heavy fog. While landing, Silva damaged his plane and had to change aircrafts before making a second attempt to complete the circuit. The group finally left the area at 9:30 a.m. that day, and they landed safely at Colatrin. Once there, they had to once again wait for better flight conditions in order to continue. It was only at 4:45 p.m. that Silva finally took off, with his companion, Ponce, following him 5 minutes later. They made their way to the second checkpoint, but by 6 p.m., Lieutenant Bellows' aircraft was nowhere to be seen. Search efforts began that same day and continue to this day, though he has never been found. 74. The Cymric was built alongside her sister ship, the Gaelic, in the Anglesey port of Amwich during the 1880s. The former was launched in 1883, with the latter 5 years later. William Thomas and Sons was the company that crafted the two. As the 20th century came around, the Irish Arklow fleet was looking to expand. It just happened that their preferred sailing configuration was the double-sailed schooner. That made the Cymric an ideal candidate for a new acquisition. So in 1906, Captain Richard Hall of Arklow bought her. She was then rigged as a schooner. Not long after, during World War I, she was requisitioned to be used to lure and sink enemy submarines. In spite of the high hopes put upon her and her crew, she only ever managed to sink a friendly vessel. After the war was concluded, she went back to Arklow, soon to be only one of 56 ships to be found at the Irish Register. That came to be as World War II first broke out, and Arklow schooners numbered a total of 14. The Cymric played a key role in the supply line of Ireland, along with 13 other schooners. Her last mission had her set off from Scotland heading towards Lisbon. Before disappearing en route, she was seen for one last time around Dublin during her second day of voyage. 73. SS Beishimo first came about in 1914 when it was launched in Sweden. After World War II, the ship was given to the United Kingdom as part of the reparations Germany had to take on. She was then acquired by the Hudson's Bay Company and renamed to the aforementioned SS Beishimo. Beishimo's fate changed drastically on the 1st of October 1931. While on a routine trip from north of Barrow, she encountered a heavy snowstorm that froze the sea around her. 2 weeks later, the ship was still locked in the ice off the coast of Wainwright. At that point, only a crew of 15 members were on board, including the captain, and they remained and made a camp about a kilometer away. After weeks of terrible weather, another blizzard hit the area. The remaining crew lost sight of Beishimo until the following day, when they realized she had vanished. They assumed she had sunk and got themselves back to civilization. She was then sighted 70 kilometers south of Barrow less than a week after being presumed gone. After seeing the state Beishimo was in, Captain Cornwell expected her to soon break apart and sink, so he had her stripped of all her cargo and left where she was. For more than 30 years after that day, she kept showing up around the Arctic Ocean, saving more than one life in the process. Its whereabouts remain unknown since 1969, in spite of recent searches. 72. Frank Lenz was born in 1867 in Philadelphia, USA, to a family of German immigrants. Early on in his life, his father passed away and his mother decided to move to Pittsburgh soon thereafter. In 1884, as Frank was 17, he joined a cycle club and started traveling around Pennsylvania. Not long after that, he began undertaking longer trips, some as far as New York, New Orleans, and even Chicago. In 1892, on the 15th of May, he set off from Pittsburgh on his bike in order to circumvent the world. At that time, he had already secured a deal with Outing magazine in order to fund his travels. He first went across the US to San Francisco. From there, he sailed to Japan, then he went on to China. It was there that he first started running into dangerous obstacles. Burma then presented itself as even harsher, with thick tropical jungles. While in passing, Frank contracted malaria, which forced him to once again sail, this time to Calcutta. From there, he ended up in Persia, and once there, he took a trip to Tabriz in April of 1894. He was hoping to reach Istanbul before midsummer, and he finally set off and disappeared before he could reach Erzurum. He was never found, but many people believe him to be one of the many victims of the period of the Ottoman Empire when it was facing great turmoil. 71. James Nicholas Gray enrolled at the University of California in 1961, earning his bachelor's in engineering mathematics 5 years later. He then went on and got his PhD 4 years after that and started working for IBM. During his career as a researcher and software designer at various companies, he contributed to several major breakthroughs. The systems he worked on stand as a standard worldwide when it comes to databases and processing transactions. In 1995, Gray started working for Microsoft until 2007 when he mysteriously vanished without a trace. On Sunday, the 28th of January, he undertook a short solo sailing trip to a nearby group of islands around 40 kilometers off the shore of San Francisco. During that morning, he made calls to his wife, both before and during the trip, and even left his daughter a cheery voicemail. His phone synced one last time with his email provider's server at 11:50 a.m. 2 hours later, his ship, Tenacious, was spotted around a mile offshore. That was the last time anyone ever saw him, and he was never found. In spite of the tremendous effort from some of the world's biggest companies, the authorities, and his family put into the search, nothing ever came of it. He was finally presumed to have passed away at sea on the 16th of May, 2012. 70. The MV Taiching 21 was found on the 9th of November 2008, drifting near the Phoenix Islands. It had been 12 days at that point since the last radio transmission came from the vessel. The captain had made a personal call to his wife in Taiwan on the 28th of October. The crew members originated from Taiwan, China, Indonesia, and the Philippines, making their disappearance an issue of international interest. On the other hand, there was no proof that the Taiching 21 was ever sending a mayday call. There was also no information regarding the supplies the crew managed to escape the flaming ship with. When found, the vessel was showing clear signs that a fire had raised it, though it was no longer smoldering. The 3 life rafts and 1 lifeboat were missing, so a search commenced in order to find the 28 crew members and the captain. It was firstly the US Air Force's C-130 Hercules, and then one of New Zealand's Air Force's Orion aircrafts that scoured the Pacific. They covered 54,000 square kilometers north of Fiji over the course of 30 hours, but came up empty-handed. Hopes for finding the men alive dimmed soon after, and the search was called off the following weekend. Around the same time, the Fiji Navy warrant officer said there was virtually no chance of ever finding the crew alive. Nobody knows what became of them. 69. In August of 1981, Hubert Marceau was a moderately successful 44-year-old businessman disillusioned with his life. That year, he proceeded to sell his 2 businesses and purchased a vessel named Jonathan while in Daytona Beach, Florida. On his newly acquired ship, he started circumnavigating the world. During his travels, spanning over 18 years, he was met with a number of obstacles, the biggest of which was having wrecked the Jonathan in 1992 on a reef. Afterwards, he spent the next few years working towards building the Montpays and set off again in 1998 in order to complete his voyage. He successfully completed his travels, docking in Halifax in 2003. He went on to publish a book about his journey and speak at a number of conferences. It was during that same year that Hurricane Juan wrecked the area while he was in port. On November 9, 2009, he left Nova Scotia, planning to arrive in Bermuda on the 16th of that same month. He never reached the destination. For days on end, searches were conducted in both Canadian and American aircraft, covering over 300,000 nautical square miles. No trace of him or his vessel was ever found, leading those that knew him to believe he might still be alive somewhere to this day. 68. Daniel Kübelbach was born on the 27th of August 1985 in Germany. There he became a pop singer, breaking into mainstream media in 2003. He stated that his childhood was plagued by bullying that caused him trauma that he hadn't been able to overcome. In 2013, he also lost one of his siblings to an accidental overdose. Daniel left Hamburg on the 29th of August 2018 on the AID Aluna cruise ship going to New York City. He was then sighted after either jumping or falling off board at around 5 a.m. on the 9th of September. At that time, the vessel was around 100 nautical miles north of St. John's, Newfoundland Island. Soon thereafter, the crew did a cabin check, establishing he was no longer on board the ship. At that point, a search operation began. The Canadian Coast Guard and 2 AID Aluna cruise ships took part. After over 80 hours of continuous efforts and over 1,200 square nautical miles covered by 4 ships and 2 aircraft, the search was finally called off. No trace of the pop star was ever found, and it's widely believed he was forever lost to the sea. Around just a month before disappearing, Daniel made a rather dark post on Facebook, telling his fans he was not in a good place and was finding it hard to deal with the pain that he'd been carrying inside of him. 67. Jacobo Grinberg was born in Mexico City in 1946. It was there that he decided at the age of 12 that he would study the human mind. He went on to study psychology at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, and then psychophysiology in New York. While there, he also earned a PhD in the field of human brain stimuli. He was known to have studied Mexican shamanism, Eastern disciplines, meditation, and other similar practices through scientific methods. By December of 1994, he'd published over 50 books on these subjects. It was common for him to undertake spontaneous travels and not to take his phone for days on end. That made it particularly hard for his family to realize if he'd ever actually gone missing. On the 12th of December 1994, they had prepared a party to celebrate his 48th birthday. He didn't show up, nor did he leave any indication about where he may have gone. Later on, it was found that he'd already been missing since the 8th of that month. In spite of there being numerous conspiracies surrounding his disappearance, no confirmed trace of him has ever been found. His life had such an impact on the public that there's even a documentary based on his life story that was released in 2020. The name of the program is in Spanish, but it reads The Secret of Dr. Grinberg. 66. Dorothy Arnold was born on the 1st of July, 1885 in New York City to a wealthy family. Her father was Francis R. Arnold, an importer of fine goods. She was brought up to become quite a socialite after graduating from the Bryn Mawr College. After completing her studies, she returned to her family home in Manhattan, where she tried to start off her writing career. Then on the 12th of December, 1910, Dorothy went out to buy herself a dress. She told her mother about the shopping trip and was then seen by a cashier and even bumped into a friend of hers on Fifth Avenue. Arnold told her friend that she was planning to return home through Central Park. She didn't arrive home that evening, and that caused her family to grow suspicious. In spite of that, her father, Francis, decided only to employ private investigators, hoping to keep the whole debacle under wraps. After that endeavor proved useless, in January of 1911, the family finally reported her missing to the police. From that point on, a number of sightings, theories, and rumors started gravitating around the incident. Sadly, the exact chain of events that led to her disappearance remain unknown to this day. Arnold was last confirmed to be seen on 27th Street at around 2 p.m. on the day she went missing. 65. Bruno Brigitte was born in Switzerland on the 29th of May, 1950. Not much of his early life is known to the public. The first records of his activities date back to 1970, when Brigitte was 19 and traveling to Lebanon. There, he joined the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, or the PFLP in short. Weeks later, on the 23rd of June, he was arrested for trying to smuggle weapons into Israel. There, he was sentenced to 15 years in prison, though he was later pardoned only 7 years later. As soon as he found himself a free man again, Brigitte went back to Switzerland. There, he decided to join a group known as the Prima Linea and wrote a book titled The School of Hate, which he published in 1980 in Italy. That same year, he joined yet another group of outlaws called Carlos. This group was to become responsible for the crimes against Radio Free Europe not long thereafter. Brigitte went on to become a person of interest in a number of cases, pulling off several crimes along the way. Then on the 12th of November, 1995, he was on board the ferry, going from Italy to Greece. That was the last time he would ever be seen. Both Greek police and the Interpol searched for him, but they came up empty-handed. 64. On the 13th of June, 1990, Treveline Evans had left the family's holiday bungalow where she'd been for the week with her husband. She had returned home in order to run her antiques shop. Later that week, on the 16th, she opened at the usual 9:30 a.m. During the first half hour of the day, she had around 25 friends and customers come in, many of them later stating that she was in good spirits. As the weather was gorgeous that day, Evans decided to head out around 12:40 p.m., leaving a sign on the window stating she would be back soon. Just before leaving, she'd been seen talking to an unidentified man wearing dark colors. At around 1 p.m., she's known to have bought an apple and a banana while strolling the town center. She was then last seen around an hour and a half later near her home. As she couldn't be contacted, her husband had a neighbor check on her only to find out that she was gone. Investigations regarding her sudden disappearance resulted in hundreds of interviews and searches of River D, the canal, mine shafts, and even caves around the area. The case was reopened in 2014, but nothing new has ever been found. 63. On the 20th of April, 1990, Christopher Kurz, aged 17, asked to stay home from school. His parents agreed and then left for work. When the two returned home, they found that their Dodge Caravan was missing along with their son. He had left a note though. It stated that he had something important to attend to and that he was feeling a little bit better than he was earlier that day. He then said he would be back at 6 unless he got quote-unquote lost, a word he underlined twice. His mother thought her son was just joking around. Kurz was never seen again, but bank records show him withdrawing $200 on the day that he disappeared. He was also thought to have taken his father's 20-gauge shotgun with him. The very next day, his family received a letter, postmarked from a town over, about 250 kilometers away from their home. The note, supposedly from Christopher, stated a number of things and offered apologies for what he was about to do. On the 22nd of April that year, the family's missing car was found about 30 kilometers north of Grand Rapids, Minnesota. There was no sign of a driver in or around it, and the keys were found inside, along with a note explaining who the van's owners were. The search for Christopher continues to this day. 62. Larry Lee Hillblom was a businessman who co-founded the company DHL. On May 21, 1995, his plane crashed, and only 2 bodies were later recovered, that of the pilot and Larry's business partner. Larry's missing body is a mystery to this day. What's especially strange about this case is that there's not a single strand of DNA in his home in Northern Mariana Islands. Authorities unearthed clothes, hairbrushes, and toothbrushes out in the yard, and they found that the sinks had been cleaned with acid. Even the drain pipes turned up nothing. The belief that he survived the plane crash wasn't so surprising, since this was the second time he'd been involved in a plane crash. After the first incident, he had facial reconstruction surgery and continued to live his life as he always did. There is a theory that his supposed demise in the second plane crash was part of a grander plan to ensure that his illegitimate children received a part of his fortune. The fact that his will was written in a way that made his estate defenseless against illegitimate children is said to be evidence of this. He was also an advocate for laws that gave illegitimate children the right to an inheritance, but this theory is not likely since access to his DNA became extremely limited during the court cases that followed. Larry's supposed demise and disappearance are a mystery to this day. 61. The Three Brothers is the name of a historic piece of jewelry. It was created towards the end of the 14th century. The piece consisted of a central diamond flanked by 3 rectangular ballast stones, studded with a pearl between each of them. A pear-shaped pearl dangled at the bottom of the artifact. The infamous jewel was known for having multiple famous faces as its owner. It continuously changed hands until it mysteriously vanished. The gem was originally commissioned by a duke in Burgundy, where it remained there for almost a century. In 1504, it was then sold to a German named Jacob Fugger. His family held on to it for approximately 50 years. After that, the treasure was sold to the British royal family, where it became one of their crown jewels. Queen Elizabeth I seemed to be particularly fond of this piece, as she could be frequently seen wearing it. Soon, the Civil War struck. England was desperate to raise funds to defend their country. Henrietta Maria, the wife of Charles I, fled to Paris for shelter with the jewel in tow. She was hoping to sell it, but no one knows whether she managed to. The gem has never been seen again since 1645. 60. In 753 BC, Romulus and his twin brother Remus founded the ancient city of Rome. According to legend, Romulus was the son of Mars, who came to Earth through Rhea Silva. When Amulius seized the Roman throne, he ordered that the twins be thrown into a river. Hesitant, his servants decided to spare their lives by leaving them on the riverbanks instead. It was believed that they were then brought up by a she-wolf who nursed them and looked after them. The she-wolf might have been a prostitute, as was the moniker bestowed upon them in the past. After the young men grew up, they learned of their story and overthrew the throne. His birth would be as mysterious as his disappearance. It's said that on the day he vanished, Romulus was at the temple of Vulcan with his senators. A storm abruptly came and surrounded Romulus with a dark and dense cloud. The storm subsided as quickly as it came, and Romulus was never seen again. One day, Julius swore under oath that he saw Romulus, but this time as a divine entity wearing a set of armor. According to him, Romulus told them that he was now a god. 59. Carroll Jackson lived with his wife Mildred, and together they had 2 young daughters. It was January 11, 1959, when they took a stop after coming back from Richmond, where they were visiting Mildred's parents. It was almost 10 p.m. when the pair decided to head home. Carroll turned into a shortcut, which was a quiet but even-surfaced road, but they never returned home. One day, a relative was driving past the same road and spotted Carroll's vehicle. She notified the police and they searched the car, but it was in good conditions and had no sign of forced entry. A colossal investigation went underway, but it proved to be unfruitful. Approximately 2 months later, Carroll's body, as well as that of one of his daughters, was found in a ditch. His wife's body and the second daughter were found near a forest. Police arrested a suspect named Melvin Reese and found a note detailing the murders and subsequently charged him. The note contained details of how Melvin took advantage of Mildred before he took her life. He didn't spare her daughter either. He was convicted of murder and revealed that he forced them into his car at gunpoint, but if it wasn't for a tip-off in the form of an anonymous letter from Glenn Moser, who revealed that Melvin spoke about how he wanted to commit murder, Carol's demise might have remained a mystery forever. 58. In March of 1977, a young Irish girl named Mary Boyle was reported missing. Mary was at a dairy farm that belonged to her grandparents on the day of her disappearance. After assisting with house chores, she accompanied her uncle as he visited from another farm to return an item that he borrowed. However, halfway through the trip, she changed her mind and decided to turn back. This was the last time Mary was ever seen. The local authorities were immediately alerted of the emergency. There was a lake near where Boyle's body resided, hence a search was ordered and divers scoured the lake. However, they found nothing. They didn't have better luck on dry land either. What makes this case interesting is that Mary's mother and sister have completely opposite views on her disappearance. Miss Boyle insists that she has no knowledge whatsoever of who's behind the disappearance of her daughter, while Anne, Mary's twin sister, is adamant that she knows who is responsible and why it happened, but is kept from publicly revealing the culprit by political forces. It's also widely believed that the police were restrained by the same forces when they wanted to further interrogate their prime suspect. Miss Boyle and Anne have both spoken up, but investigators have yielded nothing to this day. 57. This case involves a 12-year-old Russian immigrant who went missing at a mall in Kentucky. Anne was last spotted at the Bashford Manor Mall on an evening in June of 1983. When she didn't return home, her family investigated and found her red and white bicycle still outside of the mall. Police looked into the case a few days later, and a canine unit detected her scent and traced it to an apartment owned by a woman named Esther, Anne's best friend's grandmother. Esther remarked that Anne didn't set foot on her residence. The authorities investigated the family, but later cleared them of any involvement after it was concluded that the canine had made a mistake. More than 25 years later, the police finally had a breakthrough. In December of 2008, they announced that Gregory Lewis Oakley Jr. was likely the culprit. He was actually arrested for a different crime, but during his questioning, the police asked him about Anne when he replied that he had no involvement. But he failed a lie detector test. Police were unable to arrest him at the time due to a lack of evidence. He passed away in 2002, but in 2008, a fellow inmate finally revealed that Gregory did end Anne's life. The inmate passed a lie detector test this time. 56. Walter Powell was an Englishman who served as a member of Parliament for approximately 13 years, from 1868 to 1881. Walter's parents were one of the largest coal exporters in the world at the time. This meant that they were very well off, allowing Walter to eventually go on to live in one of the largest houses in the area. Walter wasn't just generous with himself, he shared his wealth through many charitable acts. In 1870, he established a reading room for the use of his fellow countrymen. He even built a school and enlisted prestigious teachers to serve his community. Walter was also known to treat children to tea at his own residence, while senior citizens received more than ample supplies of coal to see them through the winter. One winter's day, Walter boarded the Saladin, a hot air balloon. He was scheduled to fly with 2 other people from England to observe weather. The winds suddenly became too strong to steer through, and the gentlemen were blown off course. They were being blown towards the sea and were forced to quickly lower themselves near a beach. The impact of the attempted landing threw the guests overboard, but Walter couldn't get off. The balloon went upwards again towards the sea, and Walter was never seen again. 55. Model, pageant queen, and aspiring actress. These were the words people used to describe Tammy Lynn Leppard, an American woman who disappeared at the age of 18. She was well known and was featured on magazine covers in over 300 beauty contests, clinching the top spot for 280 of them. Tammy disappeared in July of 1983 after leaving her house to go to the beach. She was never seen again. Tammy's friend informed the police that they got into a fight and he left Tammy at a parking lot. Around the time that Tammy went missing, she also intended to head to California to take up some roles, but there was no sighting of her there. Her mother recalled that she didn't comb her hair that day, which was a stark contrast from her meticulous grooming. Authorities focused their investigations on 2 suspects, but didn't charge them in relation to the case due to a lack of evidence, trying to tie them to Tammy. The most peculiar detail was Tammy's unexplained behavior a few weeks before she went missing. Her continuous screaming and shouting resulted in her family bringing her in for a medical examination. tests were performed to confirm that she was free from the influence of substances. The search for Tammy continued for a long time, but she has never been found. 54. It was just like any other day when Tammy Bellinger got up and went to school in the morning. One of her neighbors witnessed her crossing the road as she continued on her journey. That evening, Tammy did not return. Her worried mother called the school to check in on her, only to be told that she didn't show up that day. Police officers were immediately dispatched to the area. Due to the fact that many crucial hours were already lost, the search was intensified by police helicopters and even boats. At one point, the local authorities even enlisted the assistance of a psychic. Despite their immense efforts, the mission proved to be futile. Although the authorities didn't have sufficient evidence to prosecute any suspect, they did name one individual as the prime culprit, a man named Victor. Victor had a long criminal record and was known to target young girls. He had a very distinct car, a blue car with a broken taillight, and it was spotted in the vicinity where Tammy went missing. On the day of her disappearance, he didn't show up at his workplace, a mechanic shop. Although investigations continued, Victor died in 2012 and was never charged in relation to the crime. Tammy's case remains unsolved and is classified as a cold case today. 53. Antoinette Calladito was an American Hispanic girl who was taken from her home in the middle of the night. One night in April of 1986 at around 3 a.m., there was a knock on their front door. While her mother was in a deep slumber, Antoinette and her siblings heard the knock, and Antoinette went to open the door. A man stood outside and called himself Uncle Joe. Her siblings went back to bed, and that was the last time they saw their sister. At 7 a.m., Penny realized that their daughter was missing. Police searched the area but failed to produce any developments. The first link came a year later in the form of a call for help. The girl claimed that she was Antoinette and that she was in Albuquerque. They attempted to track the call, but before they could reveal where it was coming from, a man's voice shouted, "Who said you could use the phone?" and the line was cut off. 4 years later, a waitress in Nevada claimed to have spotted Antoinette. She remarked that a young girl was constantly trying to get her attention. After she left, the waitress found a note under her plate with the messages, "Help me," and "Call the police" scribbled on it. It was never revealed if these were real leads or if they were just hoaxes. 52. Lady Southern Cross was a Lockheed Altair aircraft that belonged to Sir Charles Kingford Smith, an Australian aviator. He procured the plane in 1934 and intended to use it to fly to England in a competition to establish a new record for long-distance travel. Charles flew with the passenger in the two-seater plane. However, as they were flying over Southeast Asia, they mysteriously disappeared. Prior to the incident, the aircraft landed in India for fuel. Sometime into their flight, the aircraft flew by another plane piloted by Jimmy Melrose, an Australian pilot. He immediately recognized the aircraft, but little did he know he would be the last person to see it. 18 months later, an undercarriage leg was found somewhere in the Bay of Bengal, with a tire still inflated. Although it was later confirmed to have come from Lady Southern Cross, a body has never been found. It wasn't until 1999 that villagers living in close proximity to where the wreckages were found were interviewed. According to him, the locals witnessed a big light in the sky that then plunged into the ocean. More than 10 years later, in 2010, a filmmaker claimed to have spotted the remnants of the aircraft on a seabed using sonar technology. Despite these clues, nobody knows what happened to Lady Southern Cross. 51. On July 26, 1944, at the southeast of Greenland, the Douglas C-54A plane departed Great Britain, headed towards Iceland to make a stop. The military plane belonged to the United States Army Force and was manned by 6 crew members and carried a total of 20 passengers, with the purpose of the trip being to ferry American service members to Canada. The departure from Iceland went smoothly, and the plane was tracked for approximately 3 hours. However, when the aircraft was flying over the North Atlantic Ocean, air traffic control personnel lost contact. The plane never arrived in America. While search and rescue missions were conducted, no trace of the plane or human remains were found. This was the 10th loss of this model of plane, and the 5th incident that involved fatalities. How the aircraft mysteriously lost contact and vanished while flying across the ocean remains a mystery that is unsolved to this day. The plane is now formally declared missing. The most prominent passenger on the plane was Lieutenant Colonel Leon Robert Vance Jr., who previously served in France. He was injured in the fight, yet managed to lead his team to victory. He was nominated for a Medal of Honor, but his widow requested that it be given to his daughter. 50. Air France Flight 072 was flying over the Atlantic Ocean on the 1st of August 1948. It was carrying a total of 12 crew members and 40 passengers who all perished. The plane took off for Africa but made a distress call around midnight. Upon receiving the news, the airline sent 2 airplanes to search for their missing plane. The French military also dispatched an aircraft and a ship to aid the search and rescue efforts. Other countries offered help, and America sent their own aircrafts and ships to the location, while the Portuguese government allowed their aircraft to be used as well. 2 days after the incident, a French ship purportedly heard from the ill-fated plane. The same ship alleged that a second distress call was issued from the plane the next day. They were not isolated cases, as the American rescue ship also got a message from them, but it reportedly was faint and garbled. 2 aircraft seats were recovered from the ocean, and an aircraft flying overhead logged a report for wreckage sighted near where the seats were recovered. The aircraft involved was relatively new, having been used for just under a year. However, with insufficient evidence to solve the case, nobody could tell for certain what happened to the plane. 49. One day in early March 1956, a military Boeing B-47 carrying 3 people took off from Florida and headed towards Morocco. There were 2 mid-flight refuels scheduled to be performed for this flight. The first instance went smoothly, but when the plane was flying over the Mediterranean Sea before the second refuel, it suddenly vanished. The aircraft had to descend into thick clouds to meet the refueling aircraft flying at a lower altitude, but it was never seen again. The plane itself was unarmed, but it was carrying nuclear weapons inside. The weapons were contained in their designated cases, so a detonation was ruled out. A widespread search was conducted, but there was not a single piece of evidence to shed any light on the fate of the aircraft. There was no debris, no wreckage, no human remains, and no crash site. Investigators were baffled. The 3 men on board were presumed to have passed away. Just before the aircraft lost contact with air traffic control, it was reportedly flying over the Mediterranean Sea. A French news station speculated that the aircraft might have exploded mid-flight, and the Air Force calculated the approximate location of the plane and concluded that it must have been near a coastal village. Authorities from both France and Morocco searched the land and sea but failed to find anything. 48. The next case, in October of 1956, involved a Douglas R-6D-1 Liftmaster that was owned by the United States Navy. The aircraft was procured as an intended combination of both a civilian aircraft and a freight plane. At the time of the disappearance, there were 50 passengers and 9 crew members on board the flight. All 50 passengers were members of the United States Air Force who were stationed at Nebraska but were sent to England for 90 days for temporary duty. The flight was to depart England for Azores, Portugal, and was flying over the Atlantic Ocean. Just under 600 kilometers from England, the military transport air service flight disappeared. It was just past 10 p.m., and the autumn months meant that it would have been pitch black outside. The disappearance of the plane was not the first incident involving the aircraft model. 19 months ago, one of the planes crashed in Hawaii. The authorities called for a search spanning over 2 weeks, but their efforts yielded little. Ships scoured the seas, but only managed to find aircraft wheels and a single life raft. The stray items were found approximately 370 miles from England, where the flight took off. Although thorough search and rescue missions were conducted, not a single body was found. All 59 individuals on board are presumed to have passed away. 47. This incident involved a 21-year-old Boeing 727 aircraft that vanished on September 11, 1990. Fawcett Peru leased the aircraft to Air Malta at the time of the event. On the day it disappeared, it was headed towards Miami and had a total of 16 people on board, 6 crew members and 10 passengers, including an infant. The aircraft had multiple stops to make, all of which were for refueling purposes. There were a total of 4 stops, and the first 2 were completed without any issues, though after they left their second stop, they were never seen again. Somewhere between the second and third stop, the plane released a distress signal, which was picked up by 2 airplanes flying nearby. It was approximately 3:20 p.m., and the captain of the plane revealed that they were out of fuel, and that they were bracing themselves to ditch the aircraft in the Atlantic Ocean. Search and rescue officials sent helicopters and search planes in an attempt to locate the missing aircraft. Despite their relentless attempts, their search returned nothing. Search officials reported that the weather at the time had been fair, but the Atlantic Ocean was a vast place to search. The fate of the plane remains a mystery to this day. 46. On a cold winter's morning in February of 1953, an Avro York aircraft operated by Skyways Limited ferried 33 passengers and 6 crew from England to Jamaica. Soldiers and their family members were on board the flight from London as the flight was arranged for the British military. The plane made a stop at Azores, Portugal. It was to be its last. Weather conditions were good and the aircraft issued meteorological reports every hour, but the last message received from the plane turned out to be a cry for help. Multiple SOS messages were pinged out, but the pleas suddenly stopped and nobody could communicate with the aircraft. A search and rescue operation was immediately executed. Authorities searched the vast areas from both land and sea, but their efforts proved to be futile. A few days later, a Coast Guard spotted multiple patches of oil and dye markers approximately 120 miles from where the officials last heard from the plane. Investigators later revealed that the flight was not given sufficient rest. The aircraft was to be allowed a 9-hour downtime for every 9 hours of flying. The crew had less than 5 hours of rest, and fatigue became a focal point of the investigations. Despite the inquiries, the plane remains to be found. 45. It was Saturday, on July 21st, when an aircraft belonging to Canadian Pacific Airlines, CPAL, was scheduled to fly from Vancouver, Canada to Tokyo, Japan. The flight was chartered for the United Nations and carried a total of 31 passengers and crew members. The crew members were Canadian, while the passengers were American. The airplane was to make a stop at Alaska for refuel. The refueling process went on very well, and the aircraft left, only to soon come face to face with bad weather. There was heavy rain and ice, with the visibility at a mere 500 feet. The plane had only 5 hours of fuel left. When the pilot attempted to report their location, that would be the last they were ever heard from. Investigators revealed that there was a very weak signal emitted within the area, but could not ascertain if it was from the same plane. The signals soon stopped, and when the plane failed to arrive at their destination, officials presumed the plane had crashed. Canadian and American officials joined forces in a massive search and rescue operation. Over 20 planes were deployed for this mission. Despite searching for over 3 months, nothing could be found. The search was called off in late October of that year. 44. Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 2501 was a daily flight to Seattle, originating from New York City. It was nightfall on June 23, 1950, when the aircraft was flying 55 passengers and 3 crew members. The plane had 2 planned stopovers, both of which were for refueling. The first stop was in Minnesota, while the other was in Washington. When the plane was flying over Lake Michigan, air traffic controllers lost contact with them. It was reported that the pilots had previously requested for a descent. However, it was declined due to concentrated traffic at the lower altitude. The weather at the time of the incident was bad, with winds and storms lashing across the area. The authorities ordered a search, and teams were sent out to scout the area where the plane had disappeared. Sonar equipment was used, and a ship was even sent to trowel the bottom of the lake to retrieve whatever remained of the aircraft, but they didn't find anything, except a bone-chilling discovery would soon take place. While the search confirmed nothing at the bottom of the lake, search officials found small pieces of human remains floating on top of the water. The authorities then ordered divers into the water, but the search produced nothing, and the case remains unsolved. 43. On July 16, 1996, Susan Walsh, an American freelance journalist and writer, went out of her New Jersey apartment to run some errands and to use a payphone. Susan had a son, David, whose father was Susan's ex-husband, and he lived just 1 floor below them. Before Susan headed out for her chores, she sent David there so her ex could look after him, but this was the last time anyone saw Susan. Susan came from a troubled family and had difficulties with alcoholism and substance abuse. Nevertheless, she strived to pry herself away and successfully maintained a clean record for an impressive 11 years. She was enrolled in an English course at a local university. Though due to a lack of funds to support her son and her studies, Susan turned to erotic dancing for extra income. Police conducted their investigations after she disappeared and ruled out her ex as a suspect. Her friends speculated that her disappearance may have been tied to the fact that she was involved in an investigation into criminal enterprises. Susan had reportedly told a few individuals that she felt as though she was being watched by a stalker. The authorities looked into the allegations but were unable to link anyone to her case. 42. It was 1900 in Scotland when 3 men were tasked with keeping up the Flannan Isles lighthouse. These men were James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and William MacArthur. The lighthouse had been built a few years ago. One day in December, a ship noted that the lighthouse was not working despite poor weather in the midst of winter. While the ship didn't proceed to investigate, they relayed the news to the Northern Lighthouse Board, who planned to send their crew members for an inspection. However, due to the adverse weather at the time, they were unable to proceed, and it was almost a week until they were able to make their way towards the island. When the team arrived, they attempted to call out to the keepers through their ship's whistle, but they received no response, so they fired flares and no one came. One of the men walked into the lighthouse. He inspected the place and noted that the beds were unmade and the lamp oil had been refilled. On a more ominous note, he saw that the chairs were overturned and their clock had stopped. A large rock was moved much further from where it once stood, and despite multiple investigations, authorities were never able to ascertain what happened. Visitors reported hearing eerie voices on the island, and the mystery still remains unsolved today. 41. As an Arctic explorer, geologist, and naturalist, Edward von Toll had a life filled with perilous journeys. Born in Estonia, the German always exhibited a keen sense of exploration. When he was just a university student, Edward already traveled to the Mediterranean and undertook research projects on the flora and fauna of Algeria and other foreign islands. He made many important discoveries throughout his illustrious research career and was also awarded prizes for some of them. In 1900, Edward led an expedition to the New Siberian Islands. He traveled with his fellow researchers on a ship called Zaraya. The purpose of the trip was to discover the mysterious Sanikov land. Unfortunately, at the time of their journey, they encountered harsh weather, and the explorers spent a few years trapped in the Siberian area. They remarkably survived. One day, Edward and 3 of his crew decided to try their luck as they attempted to move further north with only a kayak and a sledge in tow. Their teammates attempted to rescue them, but they were held back due to severe weather conditions. While search and rescue teams were able to find signs of human presence and a note that the explorers had been there but had now left, no one saw them ever again. 40. The Pathfinder was the name of a hydrogen balloon, more commonly known as a hot air balloon or a weather balloon. It was owned by a 71-year-old American named John Weiss. On September 28, 1879, John was to fly the balloon with a passenger. Together with George Burr, John took off, but the wind speeds soon became dangerous. The men were flying over Lake Michigan in Illinois at the time of the incident when the balloon suddenly disappeared. There was a reported sighting of John's balloon flying in Illinois. Another individual also claimed to have spotted the Pathfinder 35 miles from Chicago, flying towards the direction of Lake Michigan. Search and rescue operations commenced, and while the aircraft was found, the team didn't manage to find John, who was piloting the balloon. However, things soon took a grim turn as the searchers located a body in Lake Michigan and confirmed it to be George. John's body was never recovered, and the case remains a mystery to this day. 39. Pumpero was a coal gas balloon, a variant of the hot air balloon, which uses coal gas instead of hydrogen because it was cheaper and lasted much longer. Such is the significant advantage of the balloon that one of them was used in an attempt to set a new record for night flying. Eduardo Newberry was a pilot who decided to take up the challenge. It was October 17, 1908, and Eduardo abruptly decided to invite a passenger for a ride. His guest was Argentine Army Corporal Eduardo Romero. The men were due to fly to Buenos Aires in order to attempt the record. However, that was the last time both of these men were ever seen. The Argentinian pilot was presumed dead. Prior to the incident, he had experience flying across Argentina. His mother was constantly worried for him, but he had a league of fans and supporters who were always eager to hear of his next adventures. The pilot achieved somewhat of a celebrity status. Eduardo was greatly admired because of his courage and confidence, although his mother staunchly disapproved of her son's passions. Eduardo's brother provided him with vital family support that he needed. Unfortunately, his mother's worst fears turned into a reality as Eduardo was never found. 38. China is an ancient land that holds many mysteries. One of them is the missing heirloom seal of the realm, a jade seal crafted by King Shi Huang, the first emperor of unified China, as a symbol of his power. On it was carved the words, "Having received the mandate from heaven, may the emperor lead a long and prosperous life." In ancient times, jade was symbolic of inner beauty and immortality, and the seal itself seemed to embody those values even as the rulers who possessed it faded into history. Passed down through various dynasties, the seal survived mishandling, wars, and rebellions. Unfortunately, nearly 1,200 years after being crafted, the seal was lost during the 5 Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms era. It was unclear when and how the seal was lost, but what is known is that in 1370, when the Ming army invaded Mongolia to reclaim the treasures, absconded by the previous Yuan dynasty, the seal was not amongst those treasures. Historians have put forth various theories about its disappearance. Some say that when the last Tang emperor died, the seal was destroyed alongside him. Others claim it was lost when Emperor Taizong captured the last emperor of the later Jin state. There are also those who claim the seal fell into the hands of the Yuan emperors, and this theory is the least plausible given the events of 1370. 37. During World War I, the prospect of radio-controlled aircraft was particularly intriguing, with nations and researchers attempting to create weapons. Unfortunately, many of these prototypes failed during tests, and one even disappeared. One inventor, Elmer Sperry, was able to convince the US Navy to award him funding for research. Adapting the gyro-stabilizing technology he'd invented for Navy ships, Sperry set out to create a remote explosive. All Sperry and his team achieved was failure, which used up all of the available airframes and testing material they had. In one last desperate attempt, Sperry returned to the drawing board. Soon after, he launched an unmanned N-9 aircraft via the Norden catapult. At last, it took off. He had achieved success, but then the distance gear malfunctioned. Instead of landing after 13 kilometers, it flew onwards, and the plane was last seen over the Bay Shore Naval Air Station at an altitude of 4,000 feet, flying straight east. Before any further trials could be conducted, World War I came to an end, and the Navy shut down Sperry's failed research. The test plane was never recovered, and no one knows where it went. Subsequent attempts to create a guided explosive failed, and it was only during World War II, years after that further research was conducted. 36. Some mysteries stretch back across millenniums, like the disappearance of the menorah from Jerusalem's Second Temple. A menorah is a 6-armed candlestick made of pure gold, an important part of Judaism's religion. Unfortunately, the original menorah went missing when Romans sacked the temple. For historical context, beginning in 100 BC, Israel, known as Judea then, found itself under the control of the Roman Empire. Most citizens barely tolerated it, and there were many rebellions, the first of which was the Great Jewish Revolt. As described by historian Josephus during the siege of Jerusalem, Roman battalions took advantage of the chaos and engaged in slaughter and the looting of the Second Temple. During their march of triumph afterward, the menorah was seen carried by the soldiers, but no further records of it exist. Although Jewish scholars forbade its reconstruction, the symbol itself became a popular representation in Judaism. Some theories state that it was tossed into the river, subsequently swept away or buried by sand. It could have been melted down into gold, or even taken by the barbarians that later invaded Rome. Some even say the Vatican has it. 35. British South American Airways was an airline company created by former World War II pilots, with one of the plane models in its fleet being the Avro Tudor. A converted warplane, it had rather poor performance records, and the Star Ariel was one such Avro Tudor, which tragically disappeared along with its crew and passengers. On the day of its disappearance, Star Ariel, piloted by Captain John Clough McPhee, took off at 8:41 with 7 crew and 13 passengers. Weather conditions seemed excellent, and an hour into the flight, he radioed a routine communication of the visibility and flight path, in which nothing seemed to be amiss. A few minutes later, though, McPhee called in again requesting to change the radio frequency. After that, all communication was lost. An extensive search was conducted, with the US Navy getting involved, but no oil slick, debris, or wreckage was ever found. Of note was the day that Star Ariel took off. On that day, communication problems had been incessantly plaguing the control tower, from poor reception to complete blackouts. The communication problem lasted almost exactly the entire time Star Ariel would have been in flight. Experts think that the plane's compass or heater malfunctioned, and that the pilot couldn't radio in for help because of said communication problems. Don Bennett, a fired BSAA employee, disagreed, claiming the plane was sabotaged, and that a well-known war saboteur was sighted nearby before it took off. 34. In 2020, two men from the same city went missing within weeks of each other, one in January and one in February. The two men were John Hardy and Garrett Wilson, partners in an air conditioning business that Hardy ran out of his home. Curiously, before Hardy's disappearance, he reported a theft of $80,000 from his business. After an extensive search of South Bossier Parish by the authorities, nothing turned up for either man, except Wilson's cell phone. Soon after Hardy's disappearance, though, he was found and thrown into jail while awaiting trial for second-degree murder and obstruction of justice. The victim was Garrett Wilson, whose body had been discovered in North Bossier Parish. Hardy pleaded not guilty, but the evidence, including a camera recording of him burning Wilson's clothes and his purchases of a van and various weapons, spoke against him. A burning question remained, though. A former politician, Hardy had a crippling leg injury that required the use of a walker, and Wilson was a big man, standing 6 feet tall and weighing 200 pounds. It seemed implausible for Hardy to subdue and end the life of his friend, yet the evidence pointed towards him as the culprit. 33. David Lang, a farmer from Tennessee, vanished into thin air while walking through his field on the 23rd of September, 1880. He owned land in Gallatin, living there alongside his wife and children. On a routine day, he was walking across one of his large flat fields. Lang's wife and children, along with two other men passing by in a buggy, were watching him, when he vanished suddenly. Immediately, they assumed that he'd fallen into a hole and set out to search the area. They found nothing out of the ordinary, just flat ground. Notably, there were no fences or trees in the area that could have obscured him from view. Later, a more extensive but still fruitless search was conducted, but all efforts were eventually called off and he was presumed to have passed away. A year later, something strange occurred. His daughter decided to visit the spot where the unfortunate farmer had vanished and called out his name. As she was turning to leave, a faint cry for help came in her father's voice. This was no ordinary hallucination, as her mother reported the same thing when she arrived at the spot. The same thing happened the next day, although fainter, and the voice soon vanished, along with their faint hope after a few days. Some rumors state the grass grew unnaturally tall in that area, which insects and livestock dared not approach, while others say there was no grass at all. 32. Another case of a disappearing ship is that of the Joyada. It left Samoa's Apia Harbor on the 3rd of October 1955, bound for a set of islands about 270 miles away, but it never arrived. The day before disappearing, the ship had been scheduled to leave with the noon tide, but faced delays due to a port engine clutch failure. Among the passengers were children, and after being unable to wait any longer, the passengers pressured the crew to depart, which they relented to. On the fateful day they left Samoa, only one engine was working, and their journey was expected to last between 41 and 48 hours. In the hold was an assorted cargo, medical supplies, timber, empty oil drums, various food things, all bound for unloading at the nearby islands. The ship left without any hassle or further delays, but on the 6th, a day after their scheduled arrival date, there was no sign of the ship. A message came from the port stating that no distress signal had been received. Soon a search and rescue mission was set out, scouring the area of nearly 100,000 square miles for 6 days, which eventually found the ship unharmed but devoid of its crew. One theory claims that Captain Thomas Miller died or became unable to lead, as there were red bandages found on board. There were also ongoing tensions between him and his first mate, Chuck Simpson, and the two could have fallen overboard in a scuffle, leading the other passengers to abandon ship. 31. In 1881, HMS Eurydice disappeared into the Irish Sea after a heavy storm. Originally a warship, it had been decommissioned more than once but remained seaworthy. During the Crimean War, HMS Eurydice participated in combat and was later converted into a training ship before being refitted once again under the command of Captain Marcus Augustus Stanley Hare. He commanded it on a 3-month journey of Bermuda and the West Indies with little incident, but it was on the return trip to Portsmouth that the ship ran out of luck. Off the Isle of Wight, a snowstorm broke out. Captain Hare, a devout Christian, ordered every man to save himself before clasping his hands in prayer. Out of the 319 crew and trainees on board, most died either when it sank or after exposure to the freezing waters. Only 2 survived, and barely any trace of the ship or crew members was ever found except for a few bodies. Interestingly, one witness to the disaster was young Winston Churchill, living with his family at the time. Churchill would later become Britain's World War II Prime Minister. In the years since it sank, the Phantom ship has become part of naval culture, with sightings reported occasionally. Amidst the fog, sailors have claimed to see its silhouette, which quickly disappears shortly after. Even Prince Edward of England claims to have spotted it while filming a television series. 30. Ann Miller, Patricia Bluff, and Renee Bruhl disappeared on July 2, 1966. They were last seen leaving their blankets and personal effects behind on a crowded beach to board a boat in Lake Michigan, where they spoke with an unidentified man operating the boat. Police believe, based on witnessed accounts and investigations, that after spending time on the first boat, they were dropped off, wandered the beach for a while, and were then picked up by a second unmarked boat. Following that, all traces of them vanished. There are claims that Bruhl may have been having problems with her marriage, which led to her running away, although her family denies this. Other theories range from an offshore illegal abortion gone wrong, resulting in another 2 women being eliminated as witnesses. Notably, Bluff was heavily involved in the horse racing scene, and one of her horses had won a large prize of $900 recently. 29. Anthony Strollo was a mid-level member of the Genovese crime family. He was last seen leaving his residence in New Jersey before disappearing in a presumed mafia hit job. Throughout his life, Strollo had been involved with various mafia groups and changed allegiances numerous times when it seemed profitable to do so. He was a proverbial chameleon, cold-blooded with no loyalty to anyone except himself. Under the leadership of many different mafia organizations, he orchestrated murders, money rackets, and other various illegal operations. Strollo even cheerfully volunteered to set up his best friend to be assassinated, despite his boss at the time showing kindness and allowing Strollo to bow out from being involved in the hit. Later, befitting of his behavior, he betrayed Genovese as well. This was a conspiracy with the Gambino boss, Carlo Gambino, along with other mafia heads. This act of betrayal unfortunately proved to be his undoing. Even in jail, Genovese retained much power. Eventually, he figured out Strollo had betrayed him and began plotting revenge. On the 8th of April 1962, Strollo left home for a walk. His wife told him, "You better put on your topcoat, it's chilly," and he replied that he was only going out for a few minutes. He left and was never seen again. His remains were never recovered, and no one was ever charged. When a government witness later visited Genovese in prison, Genovese allegedly hinted at the responsibility of Strollo's murder. 28. On what was a routine day trip to gather greenery for Christmas decorations, Kenneth Martin and his family disappeared near the Columbian River Gorge. The family consisted of Kenneth, his wife Barbara Martin, and their 3 daughters, Barbara, Virginia, and Susan. Their eldest son Donald, however, was unable to join as he was stationed in New York by the US Navy at the time. The Martins left home in their Ford station wagon around 1 p.m. When they failed to return later that day, friends called police. The initial conclusion based on tire tracks was that their car had accidentally plunged into the river while reversing. A tragic end, but one that happened all too often. But then a gruesome discovery was made. A few months after the disappearance, Susan and Virginia's bodies were found downstream on the Columbian River's shore, 48 kilometers apart from one another. Further investigation yielded a gun nearby. The gun and the abandoned stolen car it was found in were connected to Donald Martin. Despite becoming a suspect, owing to the connection and the strained relationship with his family, but ultimately nothing substantial came of it. 2 other ex-convicts were also arrested nearby, but were released after a lack of evidence. 27. The McStay family, consisting of Joseph and his wife Gianni and their 2 sons, lived a perfect life in Fallbrook until one evening when they all vanished. It was apparently a swift departure. In the living room, bowls of popcorn were still on the mat, and rotting vegetables along with a carton of eggs sat on the counter. Prior to their disappearance, the investigation found a call that was made from Joseph to his business associate, Charles Merritt, who claimed he was busy watching a movie and didn't pick up. Eventually, after failing to contact them for a few days, Joseph's brother Michael entered the house and found no sign of the McStays, only their dog in the backyard. A few days later, their car was reportedly found near the Mexican border. 3 years later, a motorcyclist discovered skull fragments off Interstate 15 in Victorville, which were matched to the McStays. Charles Merritt was immediately arrested. With the prior history of crime and his visit to the McStay home the night of the disappearance, he was the prime suspect. Still, there were no signs of a struggle in the home, which raises unanswered questions of how Merritt did it without them fighting back. There's also confusion over his motive and speculation that it was for financial gain as he had a gambling problem. 26. In 1750, an eerie folk tale of a deserted ship and vanished crew members gripped the locals of Rhode Island, involving the fate of the ship Seabird. It began as the Seabird approached Newport Harbor in Rhode Island. Everything was fine until onlookers suddenly noticed there was no crew commandeering it. Somehow, Seabird sailed itself past rough barriers and came to rest at Easton's Beach, where it was boarded and found utterly deserted. Called in to piece together evidence, investigators discovered that the Seabird had been returning from a voyage to Honduras and was expected in Newport that day. Some local fishermen even claimed they spotted the captain, John Huxham, hours earlier on deck as their boats passed the Seabird. There were no signs of a struggle or sickness, and all the crew's possessions and instruments were in place. Coffee was also still boiling in the galley stove, meaning the ship had been abandoned in sight of land. With the longboat missing, it was assumed the crew had panicked and escaped, but to where? A further search yielded 2 of the crew's pets left behind, a cat and a dog. Later tales say that after it had unloaded its cargo, the following morning the ship itself disappeared. This has been disputed by historical accounts, claiming it was merely sold to a wealthy businessman who changed its name, presumably for luck and to avoid any connection to the urban legend. 25. On February 1st, 1995, Richie Edwards of the band Manic Street Preachers disappeared. It was the day he and his bandmate James D. Bradfield were due to fly to America on a promotional tour of their Holy Bible album. At the time, Edwards was lodging at the Embassy Hotel in London. Instead of heading to the airport to meet Bradfield, Edwards drove back to his Cardiff home, dropped off his passport and credit cards, and disappeared. Edwards' car was found 2 weeks later near Severn Bridge. Notably, Richie had a previous history of mental health problems and self-harm, but his family claimed suicide was unlikely and not in his character to do so. In view of this, his sister eventually consented to have a book published about Richie Edwards' life. The book, Withdrawn Traces, claims a woman named Vivian was last seen with him, and that he was trying to give her his passport, stating that he didn't need it anymore. It goes on to explain that Edwards had planned his disappearance for a while, with the subject matter fascinating him since his school days. Further complicating matters, a woman he met while hospitalized at Cardiff's White Church Hospital made her own claim that he was living in Israel. This woman's claim sparked the theory that Edwards had undiagnosed autism and disappeared to shut out the world as a coping mechanism. 24. In 1981, 20-year-old Cindy Anderson disappeared after a year of being plagued by nightmares. In them, she was often murdered by a stranger, and she also received suspicious phone calls at work leading up to the incident. Cindy arrived at the legal office where she worked as a secretary on August 4th. She usually worked alone in the morning, and so she kept the door locked. After noon, 2 of her coworkers arrived to find the office locked but empty, with the lights, a radio, and air conditioning all running. On her desk was a romance novel she'd been reading, and a closer inspection turned up the fact that her purse and keys were missing. Despite having installed an alarm on her door, Anderson appeared to have disappeared into thin air along with her valuables, perhaps having run away. But she had no reason to, or so her family claimed. Anderson was a devout Christian who enjoyed her job and life and planned to quit her job soon to attend Bible college. It would be out of character for her to just disappear without notifying them. Police rounded up several suspects, including some convicted for other offenses, one of whom was a drug dealer, Jose Rodriguez Jr. Speculation was that she'd been abducted or murdered after overhearing him talking about a drug deal. Later, an informant claimed Rodriguez confessed to murdering her, but the testimony was deemed unreliable. No one was ever charged or found guilty for her disappearance. 23. In 1919, Marie Impress, a British silent film actress, vanished while on a ship named SS Orduna, bound for New York City and traveling with more than 1,000 passengers and crew. She was a singer, dancer, and actress, often playing seductive, dangerous women in film, and frequently impersonating men for performances. She'd boarded the SS Orduna 11 days earlier, but when it arrived on October 27th, Impress was nowhere to be found. According to a stewardess who had brought dinner to Empress's stateroom that evening before, Empress requested her to return at 9:30 p.m. with sandwiches. She did so, but Empress wasn't there, so the stewardess left the sandwiches for her. The following morning, they remained untouched. The bed had not been slept in either. In her room was a copy of the telegram Empress had sent to a New York hotel, saying, "Arrive Monday, please have room for me." Upon further investigation, her room had a porthole, but she was a woman and would not have fit through it. It seemed unlikely that she jumped from the deck either, as it was well lit and someone out of the numerous ship passengers and crew would have spotted her. Some speculated she pulled off a hoax, using her experience in impersonating men, but nobody ever claimed her luggage on board the ship. The case was eventually closed, listing her as having jumped overboard. 22. James Thompson was the co-founder of a Thai silk company, an enterprise that was central to reviving the Thai silk industry in the 1950s and 60s. Towards the end of the Second World War, he worked for the US in Bangkok, Thailand. This is where he would begin his career in the silk weaving industry. James vanished on March 26, 1967, while on a walk to the Cameron Highlands of Malaysia. It was a Sunday and he planned to start the day with a morning service at a local church, but while his wife and friends were getting ready to go to church, he informed them that he wanted to take a walk. He later returned and went to church as planned, and after lunch that day he decided to go on another walk. This time he would not return. Over 500 people, including trekkers, hunters, tourists, police officers, and soldiers from the army, joined the search for him. They searched for 11 days but couldn't find any leads. As the months passed by, the search was revived now and then, but the results were the same. No one could find James. Nobody knew what truly happened to James, although there was a lot of speculation surrounding his disappearance. Some people thought his competitors got rid of him, while others felt that he may have been kidnapped or even murdered. But since his body has never been found, none of these theories can be proven. 21. Harold Holt was the Prime Minister of Australia when he disappeared while taking a swim in Portsea, Victoria. He'd become Prime Minister almost 2 years before his disappearance in December of 1967. Harold loved the outdoors. During vacation, he loved to go spearfishing, diving, and snorkeling. His friends say that he could hold his breath for quite a long time, and at the same time they also warned him about his hobbies since he wasn't a strong swimmer and could easily drown or fall prey to a shark. Although Harold was quite heavy, he had to start taking painkillers and undergo physiotherapy due to a shoulder injury he sustained while playing football when he was younger. Before he disappeared, his doctor warned him about tiring himself out too much with physical activity and advised against him swimming or playing tennis. Against the wishes of his doctor, Harold went swimming on December 17th. Unfortunately, the water currents were strong and he wound up being pulled into the sea. He didn't call for help the entire time. Many people have speculated that the CIA may have taken his life since he planned to withdraw Australia from the Vietnam War. There's even a theory that he faked his death and defected to China. Nobody knows what happened to Harold, and his disappearance remains a mystery to this day. 20. Ambrose Bierce was born in Ohio in 1842. He grew up to be an incredible writer, poet, and journalist. His book, The Devil's Dictionary, is regarded as one of the greatest pieces of American literature. However, the story of his disappearance sometimes overshadows his literary achievements. When he was 71, he left Washington, D.C. to venture through Civil War battlefields. 2 months later, he made his way to El Paso in Mexico after passing through Louisiana and Texas. It was 1913, and Mexico was in the middle of a revolution. Once in Mexico, Ambrose joined the Pancho Villa Army, which was fighting against the Mexican president at the time. It's unclear whether Ambrose intended to join the fight, or if he was just there for journalistic purposes or to gather research for his next book. But once he joined the revolutionaries, he was never heard of again. Most people believe that Ambrose got caught in the violence of the revolution and lost his life as a result. In 2002, a researcher discovered an account about a gringo who felt sick and asked a former Mexican fighter to help him get back to the USA. The man said his name was Ambrosia and that he had written books. Tragically, this account states that the man passed away on the way back to the USA and was buried in an unmarked grave. 19. Percy Harrison Fawcett was an archaeologist and former explorer who disappeared in the jungles of Brazil in 1925. He was incredibly fond of the Amazon, which he believed was worthy of exploration and largely unknown. Percy's fascination with the Amazon rainforest increased after he came across an account by a Portuguese fortune hunter about a great city in the jungle. He called this city Z and set out to search for it twice in the 1920s, but each time the search took a toll on his health, so he couldn't complete his explorations. After 3 years, he managed to raise the money required to return to the Amazon to search for the lost city of Z. He was 57 at the time and was accompanied on this expedition by his son, Jack, and Jack's friend, Raleigh. He was determined to find the city, despite the mosquito and gnat-infested jungle. He even suffered from a swollen leg due to tick bites, but remained persistent. He reached a checkpoint on May 29th, a place called Dead Horse Camp, where one of Percy's earlier expeditions had ended. He wrote to his wife, telling her that failure was not an option before venturing into the unknown. He was never seen or heard from again. Nobody knows what became of Percy. Many believe he either perished along with his son and their companion, or was living among the Indians in the jungle. 18. Benjamin Bathurst was a British diplomat born in London in 1784. During the Napoleonic Wars, which lasted from 1803 to 1815, he disappeared without a trace around November of 1809. The period in which he was traveling in Europe was turbulent since the continent was war-torn. In fact, he was on a mission to strengthen Britain's alliance with Austria and had to convince Austria to war against France. After Austria lost to France, Benjamin had to figure out how to return to Britain safely. He traveled under the alias Baron Koch and spent November 25, 1809 at an inn in Berlin, awaiting for his chase to be reinforced with fresh horses. While at the inn, he wrote letters and burned documents, and then set off at 9 p.m. under the cover of darkness. That was when he disappeared. An attendant that had traveled with him, who was keeping his distance, spent over an hour searching for Benjamin without success. During the searches that followed, Benjamin's coat was discovered in the outhouse of a local family in the area. His pants were discovered in the nearby woods with bullet holes in them. Nobody knows what truly happened to Benjamin to this day. Many suspect he ran into a band of thieves. 17. On September 20th, 1988, Tara Calico disappeared. She'd left her home early in the morning to go for a bike ride, which she did daily, with her mother joining her occasionally. Around the same time Tara disappeared, her mother stopped going on bike rides after a motorist stalked her. Tara's mother tried to convince her to take a self-defense spray along with her on bike rides, but Tara refused. The day Tara disappeared, she had plans with her boyfriend at noon, so when she didn't return by then, her mother went out looking for her. She later called the police. The investigation soon bore results, and Tara's Walkman was found on the road. Many people had seen her riding her bicycle as well as a pickup shadowing her. This led to the theory that Tara had been kidnapped. On June 15, 1989, a woman came across a picture in the parking lot of a convenience store in Florida. In the picture, a girl and a boy had their hands tied behind their backs and duct tape covered their mouths. Scotland Yard concluded that it was Tara in the picture, but the FBI did not reach the same conclusions. Tara's case eventually turned cold, although a sheriff from Valencia County in New Mexico stated in 2008 that Tara may have been the victim of a car accident that the perpetrators covered up. 16. Madeleine McCann was on holiday in Portugal when she vanished on May 3, 2007. She was with her parents and siblings, and family friends also tagged along for the trip. At 8:30 p.m. that day, Madeleine's parents put her to bed with her siblings while they traveled nearly 50 meters away for dinner with friends. They checked in on their children at 10 p.m. and found that Madeleine was missing. 4 months after an investigation into Madeleine's disappearance, Portuguese authorities made her parents suspects after police dogs barked inside the holiday home, which is something they were trained to do if they detected blood. The dogs barked again while inside Madeleine's parents' car they used during the trip. Another theory was that Madeleine was abducted. A witness claimed to have seen a man carrying a child across a nearby junction at 9:15 p.m. However, Scotland Yard later revealed that what the witness saw was another tourist carrying his own daughter, and that she had nothing to do with Madeleine. More leads were followed by private investigators. For instance, a sighting of a young girl in Morocco asking a stranger she was with when she would see her mother again, which coincided perfectly with Madeleine's disappearance. In 2020, German authorities started investigating a new suspect. However, to date, it's still not clear what happened to Madeleine, and the theories are never ending. 15. On the 2nd of August, 1947, a British South American Airways aircraft named Stardust crashed into a mountain in Argentina. The radio operator on board had signaled to an airport in Santiago that they would land at 5:45 p.m., and this was at 5:41 p.m. Chilean and Argentine authorities conducted a search, which other British South American Airways pilots joined. However, they were unable to find the crashed aircraft or any evidence of the people on board who tragically passed away. British South American Airways conducted another search lasting 5 days, but also came up empty-handed. Due to a lack of evidence as to the whereabouts of the crashed aircraft, many people have speculated what could have happened. Some claim that the aircraft was destroyed because it was carrying sensitive diplomatic documents better kept from the public eye. Others have gone so far as to claim that a UFO was behind the disappearance. Decades after the crash, mountaineers and the Argentine army would stumble upon wreckage from the craft. Human remains were also found, and DNA tests confirmed that they belonged to 5 of the 8 victims that were on the flight. This has led to the theory that the crash caused an avalanche that buried the wreckage. 14. Albert Victor Grayson was an English socialist and member of parliament from 1907 to 1910. In September of 1920, Albert mysteriously disappeared. Given his status as a socialist politician, his disappearance received national attention. Leading up to his disappearance, the Special Branch, a national security and intelligence agency, spied on him due to allegations that he may be an agent for the Russians. After Albert found out that he was being spied on, he also realized the Prime Minister was selling honors, such as knighthoods, for a price. He publicly threatened to expose the culprits behind this scheme and was later beset by assailants in a bid to silence him. This was at the beginning of September 1920, the same month Albert disappeared. At the time he was attacked, Albert was living a lavish life, although it was difficult to justify because he earned a basic income from journalism, which he was not fully committed to. Some historians believe that Albert blackmailed elites in order to maintain his expensive lifestyle. Whatever Albert was involved in, it would all come to an end for him on September 25, 1920, when he got a phone call while out drinking with friends. He informed his friends that he was going to the Queen's Hotel and he would never be seen again. A leading theory in his disappearance is that he was murdered because he knew too much about corrupt politicians. 13. Richard John Bingham, also known as Lord Lucan, was an aristocrat from London. On November 8, 1974, he disappeared at a time when he was suspected of murdering his children's nanny, Sandra Rivet. At the time, he was dealing with financial issues since he was a gambling addict, and his marriage with Veronica Duncan, with whom he'd had 3 children, had fallen apart. Although Lucan was considered a masterful gambler, his losses often outweighed his winnings, and after the birth of his 3rd child, Veronica started to suffer from postnatal depression. The couple eventually separated, with Lucan failing to keep custody of the children. Meanwhile, his gambling addiction was getting worse. On November 7, 1974, after failing time and time again to regain custody, Lucan ended the life of Sandra, Veronica's new nanny, in Veronica's home. Lucan then attacked Veronica, but Veronica fought back, trying her hardest to defend herself even as Lucan tried to choke her. After the fighting stopped, Veronica told Lucan she could help him get away with his crime, only to slip out of the house when Lucan was unaware. Lucan ended up disappearing before police could catch up with him. Many believed he'd taken his own life, even Veronica. However, a detective who looked into the case believes Lucan left the country to live elsewhere. Regardless, nobody knows what became of Lucan. Even with multiple sightings around the world, in India, New Zealand, and even Colombia, Lucan was never found. Number 12. William Morgan, a stoneworker and writer from New York, disappeared in 1826 after he declared that he was going to write a book exposing the Freemasons. Following this, he was jailed on made-up charges and he disappeared shortly after. The Masons tried everything they could to stop the publication of his book, including burning down the print shop that was responsible for printing William's book. Failing this, they organized for him to be arrested for non-payment of loans and stealing a shirt and tie. While he was in prison, many believed the Masons bailed him out. What happened next is a matter of speculation. The leading theory is that Morgan was drowned in the Niagara River. A member of the secret society, Henry Valence, even admitted to taking part in ending Morgan's life. Other Masons stated that they'd paid Morgan to leave the country and never return. Sightings of Morgan in other countries lent credibility to these Masons, but since Morgan was never found, there was no way to know what truly happened to him. Morgan's sudden disappearance led to an anti-Masonic movement, and in 1882, the National Christian Association built a statue in his memory. 11. Amy Lynn Bradley was 23 years old when she went on a week-long cruise with her family in 1998. They were on vacation in the Caribbean and were aboard the Rhapsody of Seas when Amy went missing. At around 5:30 a.m. on March 21st, her father saw her sleeping on the balcony, but when he returned half an hour later, she was gone. When her father first reported her missing, her brother said Amy had gone to get cigarettes, which partly explains why the crew did not urgently start looking for her. On top of this, the crew had just docked, and the crew were too distracted to look for Amy. This is likely when Amy was whisked off the ship as well. Searches were later conducted on the ship, and there was no sign of her. The authorities immediately suspected a man called Yellow, who Amy was partying with earlier that morning. Yellow said that he saw her at 1 a.m. and his story checked out. Many witnesses claimed to have seen her later on. A taxi driver in the area claimed she asked him for a phone. 10 years after she went missing, another witness claims Amy asked him to help her. She was in a brothel but was afraid of getting into trouble, so he ignored her. Given this, many people believe Amy was likely abducted. Number 10. On January 26, 1966, Jane, Arna, and Grant Beaumont disappeared. They'd taken a bus to a beach nearby in the morning, which was quite normal at the time despite Jane being 9, Arna being 7, and Grant being 4. Besides, Jane was responsible and usually took care of her younger siblings. Nancy, the Beaumont children's mother, started to worry when her kids didn't come home at noon, which is what they had agreed. She searched for her kids along with Jim, their father. At 5:30 p.m., they informed police that they couldn't find their children. The police searched for the kids and even checked a nearby water body after a witness said she saw the children at 7 p.m. there on January 26th. The police began to suspect that the children were abducted after other witnesses said they saw a blonde man playing with the children at the beach at 11:30 a.m. Another family friend was sure that he saw them at 1:30 with the same blonde man and woman. A few months later, after the abduction, a man reported witnessing the Beaumont children being lured into a deserted house by a man. The authorities later suspected a criminal known as Arthur Brown, who was known to take advantage of children, could have been the culprit, but no conclusive evidence has been found and the case remains cold. Number 9. Evie Nemeth was an author, engineer, and professor. In the technology world, she was renowned for her work with system administrations and networks. In 2013, she went missing at sea. She was sailing in the Tasman Sea aboard a yacht known as Nina. She was headed to Australia along with other crew members, but there were strong winds and sea conditions deteriorated during their journey. Many believe this to be the reason the yacht vanished. The last phone calls from Nina were made on June 4th. A meteorologist from New Zealand, who was the recipient of one of the calls, was informed that the weather had turned nasty. The New Zealand authorities started looking for Nina, but there were no leads. What's strange is that the yacht was equipped with an emergency beacon and a satellite phone, so the authorities could not understand how it would just disappear that way. Some even speculated that the yacht sunk very quickly, but there was no evidence at all to support this theory. The authorities gave up the search on June 5th, leaving Evie's family to continue to invest time and money in looking for her. Hundreds of hours of searching later, and her family still couldn't find her. Sadly, they're yet to know what happened to Evie and the crew that were on board the Nina. Number 8. John Lake was a sports journalist living in New York. On December 10, 1967, he vanished on the way to the subway. At the time, he was experiencing a lot of problems in his life, including financial issues and a failed marriage. He was also drinking and had moved out of the family home to live on his own. The evening he disappeared, he was having dinner with Sandra, a nurse who said John had a lot to drink. They took a taxi to her home, and when John asked her if he could come upstairs, she told him she was busy and that he should take a taxi home. This was when John decided he would rather take the subway home. Sandra was the last person to see him alive. 4 days later, he was reported missing and the authorities set out to look for him. Seeing that he was quite famous, he'd interviewed some of the top athletes in those days, so his disappearance received widespread attention. Sadly, his trail went cold and the authorities couldn't figure out what had happened to him. Some years later, John's son came across a picture of a deceased person who resembled his father. However, it was difficult to be sure and a DNA test was not possible because the body was discovered in a mass grave. Number 7. Dorothy Forstein was 40 years old when she disappeared from her home in Philadelphia in 1949. The evening she went missing, her husband, Jules, arrived home late and found their children, Edward and Marcy, holding each other in the bathroom, crying that their mother was gone. Marcy told her father she witnessed a man carrying Dorothy downstairs. The man assured her that Dorothy was fine and that she should go back to sleep. This was not the first time that Dorothy had been attacked, though. In 1945, a neighbor witnessed an assailant attack Dorothy as she was about to enter her home. The assailant left her unconscious when he heard police sirens. An investigator concluded that someone had tried to take Dorothy's life since nothing was reported stolen. Dorothy became paranoid after that traumatic incident, and she used to be happy and outgoing, but now started to live her life in fear. Jules was a judge, but was not sure what the cause of the attack could have been. He rarely left Dorothy's side after that until October 18th, when he attended a banquet. The police searched for her everywhere and did not believe Marcy's story about the man carrying her away at first. Oddly, newspapers reported her disappearance for a short period but then suddenly stopped. In recent years, her family's attorney has asked websites to not feature Dorothy's story, making her disappearance even more mysterious. Number 6. Kryptos is a sculpture in the courtyard of the CIA headquarters in Virginia. It's quite intriguing because it has 4 encrypted passages and only 3 have been deciphered. In 2010, 2014, and 2020, the sculptor of Kryptos, Jim Sanborn, gave codebreakers hints. The first word was Berlin, the second was clock, and the third was northeast. A computer scientist, the CIA, and the NSA claim to have resolved the first 3 passages by 1999. The first one read, "Between subtle shading and the absence of light lies the nuance of illusion," although the word illusion is misspelt. The second passage lays out coordinates. The third is an excerpt about the opening of King Tut's tomb from the book The Tomb of King Tut. Codebreakers are known to have become overly consumed with trying to decode Kryptos. A game developer, Ilanka Dunnan, who is in charge of an online community of codebreakers, says that she gets called while she's at home. It's Jim Sanborn's hope that the code will be deciphered before he departs from this world, hence why he shared a clue in 2020. Hopefully his wish will come true. Number 5. In the 1800s, wooden tablets etched with glyphs were discovered on Easter Island, an island known for large monolithic statues that dot its landscape. It's unclear when the artifact was created, and although many people have tried to decode its symbols, none have managed to do it. According to oral history, a small minority were capable of inscribing the glyphs on wooden tablets, and that the artifacts were sacred. This collection of glyphs is known as Rongo Rongo. Rongo Rongo translates to reciting, declaiming, and chanting out. The symbols themselves look like various types of animals and plants, and some resemble human beings as well. Oral tradition says that shark teeth were most likely used to carve the characters. The challenge in decoding Rongo Rongo is the lack of texts, images, and a historical context with which to better interpret them. Hence, many people believe the Rongo Rongo is a form of proto-writing. The Atlas of Language suggests that the Rongo Rongo was a tool used to aid in remembering. Number 4. The Georgia Guidestones is a monument made up of a set of stones located in Elbert County, Georgia. 10 guidelines are etched on the monument in 8 different languages, along with a shorter message written in 4 dead languages. The man who commissioned the structure, known by the pseudonym R.C. Christian, stated that a secret group had been planning to erect the structure for 2 decades. The guidelines state that the human population should be capped off at 1 billion. Each country should govern their own countries fairly, and that human beings should treasure love and seek harmony with nature and more. A tablet lying close to the monument also alludes to a time capsule buried in the area. It's not surprising that the monument was met with a wide range of views. Wired, an American magazine, suggested that the guidelines are the 10 Commandments of the Antichrist, while other conspiracy theorists have gone so far as to suggest it's a New World Order. A local minister even declared that the stones would be a place of worship for cults. The most agreed upon interpretation of the stones is that they're a basic guide to rebuild civilization in the event of a catastrophic disaster. Number 3. The Shugborough inscription is a code inscribed on Shepherd's Monument from the 1700s in Staffordshire, England. The code, which is a sequence of letters, is known as the most difficult ciphertext to decipher. Below the inscription lies a mirror image of a painting known as Shepherds of Arcadia, which was painted by Nicholas Poussin. A lot of people believe that the Shugborough inscription has something to do with the Holy Blood and may even point to it. This possibility is mentioned in the book The Holy Bible and the Holy Grail. Furthermore, Thomas Anson, an admiral for the British Navy, commissioned the monument, and his wife had connections with the Knights Templar religious movement, who played an important role in the story of the Holy Grail. This roused nationwide interest in the Shugborough inscription. Other researchers and investigators have put forth different theories about the monument. Some believe it's a coded message, while others believe that it references Bible verses. One researcher suggested that the sequence of letters is a polyalphabetic cipher, known as Magdalene. The majority agree that the inscription is either Greek or Latin and is referencing a historical event. But beyond this, nobody has actually decoded the Shugborough inscription. Number 2. The Phaistos disc is made from fired clay and dates back to 2000 BC. On both sides of the disc, there are symbol inscriptions. An Italian archaeologist, Luigi Pernier, found it in 1908 on an island in Greece. The discs attracted attention of codebreakers who were eager to decipher its meaning. Unfortunately, too many assumptions surround the disc, and without a historical understanding of the time the disc was made, a trustworthy deciphering is highly unlikely. At the same time, some archaeologists do not even think the disc is authentic. In many cases, many archaeologists have attempted to decode the disc. The theories about it range from it being a story, a prayer, and even a board game. While many archaeologists are enthusiastic and determined to decipher the disc, the general consensus is that it will prove difficult until more similar discs are found. However, after 6 years of studying the discs, Dr. Gareth Owens, along with John Coleman and other professors at Oxford, claim they finally cracked the mystery. Together, they found out that there were a few key words in the text, including pregnant mother and goddess. They conclude the disc must be a prayer to a goddess. Number 1. The Beale ciphers, or the Beale papers, are a collection of cipher texts, one of which is a map of over $43 million of buried treasure. The first cipher text allegedly points out the location, and the second describes the treasures, with the third containing the names of the owners of the treasures. The tale of the 3 cipher texts stems from a pamphlet from 1885 which stated that there was a treasure buried in Bedford County, Virginia, by a man named Thomas J. Beale. The Beale ciphers are essentially a map to Thomas's long-lost treasures. However, with only one of these texts having been decoded, it's unlikely that the treasures will ever be unearthed. Many people believe that the entire tale is fiction, and that the treasures don't exist. Some scholars have even showed the historical records that a man called Thomas Beale may have never actually existed. Regardless, many people are determined to decipher the codes. Codebreakers have tried using the Bible and Magna Carta as guides, thinking a book cipher was used to produce the Beale ciphers, but none of these codebreakers have succeeded so far. Famous poet and writer Edgar Allan Poe is also speculated to be the original writer of the pamphlet that brought the story of Thomas's treasure